Hey there.
Hello, Kevin. Welcome to Writing and
Good
Fighting.
mo good morning. Thank you for having me.
Yes, good morning. You are in Las Vegas. Correct.
Correct.
Yes. So thank you because it's just a little bit after 8:30. So we appreciate getting up for class this morning. And we are so excited. We've just been talking about all the things we want to ask you because this is where we can get our boxing nerd on, because we've been wanting to get into that. And we have so many questions about that. So what I'm going to do is introduce you and then kind of give you an update of where we've been in our class in terms of being in Washington, D.C. at American University. And now my class is actually throughout the world. We have two members in South Africa. We have students in Oregon, in New Jersey, Florida.
Awesome.
Yes, so we are, but thankfully we can come together. And what we really appreciate, Kevin, is that you are, because it's been disruptive and we've been a little scattered, thank you for allowing us to have these conversations with someone like yourself, with your knowledge and your experience, because we feel so fortunate to be able to do this.
Well, it's my pleasure. I'm happy to do it.
Well, thank you. All right, well, I'm going to introduce Kevin. He is award-winning journalist who covers both MMA and boxing for Yahoo Sports. He began writing about fighting while still in college students at Point Park University in Pittsburgh. And his first major bout he covered ringside was the WBC heavyweight title between Larry Holmes and Ronaldo Snipes. That was back in June 11th, 1981. Kevin has won numerous awards, including Outstanding Journalist by the Nevada Press Association in 1999, becoming the first sports writer to be so honored. And a native of Pittsburgh, Kevin now resides in Las Vegas. And we'd love to also, we're going to tell you about our time in American here. We'd love to know what it's like in Vegas at this point. Because our first case in the DC area was on March 5th, and that's also the first case that happened in Las Vegas. As of today, the DC has 3,321 cases. That's just the district, which
Right.
is 600,000, and 142 deaths. Now, Nevada, what's very interesting is that even though they had one case March 5th, and they're not as densely populated, you guys closed the casinos, 440 casinos on March 17th.
Amazing. It is
That's
incredible.
incredible. And that early. I don't know, Scott, you might know this, when Disney World closed. I mean, it might have been around the same time, but unprecedented. And so now the whole state of Nevada has about 1,000 less than the district, about 2,476, and only 86 deaths. So we would love to learn what it's like in Vegas. I can't even imagine what the Strip is like. And also, when you think fighting's going to come back.
Sure. I should tell you to start with that I am actually working on a story. So it shows you don't just do sports. When you become a a journalist, you never know what you're going to do. And they asked me to do a story. What is it like in Las Vegas now, and what impact is it going to have financially? Because we are a tourist-based economy, and there's a lot of places that have tourism as one of their biggest parts of their economy. But Las Vegas, it's almost 100% tourist-based economy. And so when we close the casinos, that is devastating to our economy. I drove down, because I'm doing this story, I drove down the Strip the other day. And generally, they consider the Strip starting at Las Vegas Boulevard in Sahara. And I went south all the way down to Las Vegas Boulevard and Russell Road. And that would go, maybe 4 miles. I saw one person, and it was a runner who was running down the road. There was no cars, there was no people walking on the street, just completely dead. And all the casino marquees all just said, "Hey, Nevada strong, we'll be back. We can't wait to see you. Stay safe." That was it. Nothing going on. As far as the fights, they're actually in process now of talking about when they may do that. And I think you'll see something probably late May. I did a piece the other day. I talked to the executive director of the Nevada Athletic Commission. And while normally he would have the say, because of the seriousness, it's going to probably defer to the governor. But he said that they're going to follow the science, and they're not going to open or regulate any fights until they're convinced it is safe. And one of the problems that they're concerned about is, hey, we've been very aggressive in fighting this and doing social distancing and staying at home. And now if you start bringing people in, fighters from New York or places where there's a lot of it, what are we going to do? So they're going to be cautious about it. The UFC really wants to go very badly at their Apex facility on campus. A lot of the boxing promoters have talked to them about doing it. And MGM is working on some plans as well. I think we'll see something, maybe in the middle or late part of May, but it wouldn't surprise me if it even went a little bit longer than that.
Well, I can't wait to get into that. Let's back up actually, because you've been very much breaking news in new, mediums of media consumption. And I mean that Instagram Live. We have to ask you because I'll never forget. I think I looked at my computer the next morning, and they're like, Kevin Iole breaking news with Dana White on Instagram Live. And, I was just like, wow, how did that happen? And did you know that Dana was going to drop the
No.
challenge?
No, it was crazy. So I should give the backstory to that. I had been on vacation. I was supposed to, after the last UFC, which was 248.
Mm-hmm.
I went on vacation the following day, and I was supposed to go to Hawaii to play golf on a 2-week vacation. And that was right when it was starting. And so my friends that I was going to go with, they decided not to go. I was willing to go, but they decided not to. So we were out. So now I'm on vacation, sitting at home, doing nothing, quarantined while this pandemic is going on. So the 2 weekends and my first day back to work, and you know how it is. I started on Monday. Now that I'm trying to find news and trying to find what's going on. So I wrote a couple stories that day, but it wasn't a busy day, and I'm just putting calls out and reaching out to people to try to set some things up. So I decided, it was 2:00 and I felt like I didn't put in a full day. And so I said, let me do a chat on Instagram and just, maybe people have questions about the fights or what's going on and I can answer them. So I didn't even advertise. I didn't put it out and wait. I just went on live and started going. And literally the whole time, the most I ever had was 50 people. And I think at one point I had 11 and it was a low number. So finally the questions were starting to repeat. So I said, hey, everybody, I appreciate it. And just as I said that, I see popped up, Dana White wants to join your live chat. And so I looked at it, and for a minute I thought, is this really Dana? No, Dana and I have known each other for 25 years or more. And I saw it and I said, yeah, that's his logo. So I clicked on it, and sure enough, there he was. And he was sitting at home and happened to see me on there and said, I'm going to join in. So we started talking about the fights, and I started asking him questions. And the great part about it is I went from a maximum of 50 to 30,000 once Dana got on. So I went whoop, and it went right up.
Word travels fast. Wow. And so as he's telling you this, did you have, what were your thoughts about the state of UFC 249 at that point?
Well, at that point, I was still, doubtful that they could pull it off. And, my sense was, hey, there's a lot going on here, and it's very difficult to ensure that safety, not only of the people at the event, but then when those people leave and go outside, and what are they doing? So I was questioning myself whether he would be able to pull it off. But at that point, I did. Later, I wrote a column and saying they shouldn't do it. But at that point, I still was coming to my decision. But I was very doubtful whether they would be able to do it or not.
Yeah, and at that point, it was still in play of going international, right? Maybe Abu
Correct.
Dhabi. So it was all very much more open in the air of what was going to happen. And then, I think we learned more about what was possible. I have to ask you about that because you did write an article on April 6th voicing your concerns. And this is when we knew it was at the Tochi Palace on the tribal lands at that point.
Right. Yeah. It came out. Now, I had found out. I mean, it's kind of funny because you mentioned I cover both boxing and MMA.
Yeah.
The minute that they announced that somewhere on Earth, I started getting boxing people texting me. It's going to be at Tachi Palace because they had heard. So I actually lost this because I tried to be cautious. I wanted to confirm it on the record. I hate sources said and off the record things, and or not off the record, but anonymous things. I hate that, and I want to be able to say UFC 249 is at Tachi Palace in California, said Dana White or said somebody. And so
Yeah.
I have all these boxing people telling me, in fact, my wife was getting mad because we had dinner delivered and I'm getting people calling me saying, hey, I don't know if you know this, but the fight's going to be at Tachi Palace. So I had a lot of people who felt, did I lose you?
Nope, I think we're good.
Okay. Okay, good. I just saw the screen change.
Yeah.
Um, I had a lot of people saying that, it was there, but I couldn't get anybody on the record saying that. So I'm making calls trying to get that on the record. And somebody at UFC said to me, well, I'll tell you off the record, we're going there, but you're going to have to find out elsewhere. So I knew it was going to be there, but I couldn't get it. And then the New York Times reported that it was on. So I'm not sure how they found out.
Yeah.
So I was kind of disappointed because hours earlier I knew, and it was probably about a 6.5 hour span. And then the New York Times put it out. And interestingly enough, they did not identify a source, which I didn't like, because that was a pretty significant thing. And I felt like, you're putting this out there that somehow, Tachi person should have confirmed or whatever. And that I just felt like, to give the reader confidence that this is actually accurate. This wasn't like I was saying, hey, Joe Blow is going to fight Bill Smith on such and such a date. This was a pretty consequential decision. And so the fact that I really wanted to have that on the record before I confirmed it. And so I got beat to that one by the New York Times.
Uh, well, I will talk about this on journalism. You have your, decisions to make on whether to go with sources said or wait. And, sometimes it's better to wait, and, but thank you for filling us in that you did have this knowledge. And then on April 6th, you wrote an article voicing your concerns about the risk may not be worth the reward. And when I saw that, I was like, knowing that you have this access to Dana White, were you worried that, this is something that he might read and then think, well, why is Kevin, I went on his Instagram live. He, can you tell me about your feelings there?
Sure. And I'll tell you, a couple days he didn't talk to me after that. So that was when they actually made the decision that day to not hold the show. When ESPN asked him to stand down, I texted him, I called him, and he wouldn't talk to me. Now the UFC PR people did and said, "Oh, he's a little miffed, but he'll be over it." And we've had those things over the years all the time that have happened. He's not happy about something, and so he cuts off access. But I think, I wasn't worried about it because I know one thing. Who is my obligation to? My obligation is not to Dana White. My obligation is to the people who are coming to Yahoo Sports and reading what I write. And so I felt like I had to do the right thing. So and I'm kind of in a weird position. I honestly, I don't like it. I wish it was different. I'm a reporter and a columnist. And
Mm-hmm.
so I'm paid to give my opinion, but sometimes I have to report the facts. And so that gets in the way a lot of times. And so it puts me in some strange spots. But I felt like, my job is to give my opinion and what I think. And I really felt strongly at that point that it was going to be difficult for them to be safe, even though I knew, and I knew to a large degree because I'd done that Q&A about, I was working on that Q&A and it didn't come out till the next day, but I knew a lot of the precautions that they were taking, but I still felt it wasn't the right thing to do. So I said, my obligation is to the people who are going to come to our site and read this story. And I felt like if Dana doesn't talk to me, Dana doesn't talk to me, and there's other ways of finding out news, and I'll live with it. And so,
Yeah.
that's what I did.
No, good for you. I mean, that is interesting. As a journalist, you have these moments where you have to make these decisions on your principles of who is your obligation for, and it's not easy. And and then a lot of people take flack for it, but yeah, no, I think, and it's interesting to see how history kind of played out there. Now we're still having UFC. I don't know if it's 249. I don't know what you're
It
called.
is 249. They're calling it 249.
Okay, 249. what's the latest on that? And that's supposedly May 9th, a
Right.
huge card that has changed and grown. Thoughts on that? Because it sounds like Vegas is not an option.
Yeah, I don't think Vegas is an option yet. So I don't have unlike Tachi Palace, I don't have any tips on this one yet. So I don't really know. My guess is Florida is probably going to be the
Mhm.
best bet of where it's going to go. Dana told me the other day, and I put this in a story. Fight Island will be ready about a week or so after UFC 249. They're doing the construction, so that is going to be a venue for them, but not ready yet.
Wow. Okay. There's so much there. So we'll get to Fight Island because I'm fascinated with that. There's so much, there's so much imagery that we are all constructing in our heads, right? From Return of the Dragon to Mortal Kombat. But
Right.
looking at Florida, we know that the governor has made it, has said that these kind of events, that WWE, and I think it's been confirmed that the UFC would also be part
Right.
of that, are essential and they can work. So do you think, like I've always shared with ideas that maybe the UFC can use this WWE performance space, or actually any kind of arena or a closed down casino in Florida? What do you have any hunches? And I know
Yeah,
journalists, you're
I,
not.
I don't think they're going to do WWE because WWE is going to be recording regular shows out of there. They have 3 nationally televised shows a week that they do. So I think it's going to be in use too much for the UFC to use it. I think it would be an option for them that they would like to go to. So I believe that they will find a casino that has a venue that they can use and work there. That's my best guess.
Yeah.
I mean, with Dana, you never know. On that Instagram live, if you remember back when he said before Tachi Palace came out, he said, I have 3 sites in the US and I have 4 sites internationally that I'm working on that I can use. I later confirmed that South Dakota and Kansas were 2 of the sites that they had spoken to as well. Um, so, any of those could still be in play. But I think given what happened in Florida and now differently, and I think this gives Disney cover, the governor is saying it's okay to go there. So in California, Senator Dianne Feinstein put out a letter objecting and asking Disney to pull UFC 249,
Yeah.
asking Turkey Palace to pull it off. The governor actually made a call to Bob Iger, the chairman of the board of Disney, and said, I'm not happy with this, and I realize it's on tribal land, so it's sovereign land, and I can't stop it, but I
Yeah.
would do you some favors maybe if you can do this for me. And
Wow.
so, so they had 2 very powerful political leaders there that, voiced objection. And so Disney decided they do so much business in California, they backed down and went off. But now if you go to Florida, the governor clearly, he had spring break there in face of a lot of criticism and didn't shut down. And so I believe Florida would be the best bet. But again, like I say, I don't know. I think Dana learned his lesson, and whatever he's doing, this is going to come out at the absolute last minute because he's going to try to keep it as quiet as he can possibly do.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so before we get, because I'm very curious about Fight Island. So, what are your chance? What are you banking on? We're thinking probably Florida, like a 50% chance, or even higher. That
I would say better than 50%. I really would. I think that makes the most sense because everything, Florida has hosted MMA fights. They've regulated the sport. They actually regulated one during the pandemic. They had a closed door when a
yeah,
small promotion down there did it. So
yeah,
they have a history of doing it. And it gives ESPN and Disney political cover because the governor is endorsing this, and President Trump, certainly is behind it, and he is a friend of Dana's. And so as a result, I think that makes it the most likely scenario. Now the question is, okay, the state of Florida is a big place, and there's a lot of places that they could go there. Where does it go in Florida?
yeah. Well, actually, we have a Florida resident, a friend of the class, Scott. Can you give us, as a Florida resident, there's a lot of, you've talked with friends who are working Disney and different arenas. Do you have any insight or any idea where you?
Yeah, thanks for asking, and I appreciate you having me. The thing about Florida is it's really the Wild West down here, and DeSantis is kind of on his own, and obviously this may or may not have to do with a $20 million donation to the super PAC. I'm not saying anything whether it is or isn't. but sports are open for business here, and they're looking to bring it. The big news is really the NBA looking to reopen at Disney. They've got 12 gyms, multiple hotels to house a different team in each hotel. The idea is crazy, but if you want to get the playoffs off, it's going to go that way. I think if it's going to be the UFC, I think Tribal Land is probably the most likely scenario here with the Seminole tribes. You've got the group in Tampa, and you've got the group in Lauderdale that have both done multi-million-dollar refurbishments. The group in South Florida actually built a hotel in the shape of a guitar. I mean, they're putting crazy money into it. My guess would be, there. I've heard the WWE Performance Center kind of tossed around, but as Kevin said, they're pumping 3 live events out of there a week. The thing I do know about those is I believe those are all consecutively done. So there is a window, if they want to do it that way. The production standpoint may not be too difficult, but the likelihood probably isn't there, even though there is a relationship. So if it was my guess, it would probably be one of those 2 places to kind of get the ball rolling. And as far as Fight Island, I know we've joked about it, but it's got to be Sanibel, right?
Oh, Kevin, that is Sanibel. Do you know anything else about Fight Island?
Well, the only thing I know is it's supposedly in international waters, because the reason they're doing Fight Island is so many countries are restricted from having people come to the United States, and a lot of fighters internationally can't get into the country because of the crisis going on. So he wants those fighters to be able to fight and make a living and do their thing, and of course just for put his shows on. So as a result, he has to find an international place. So if it's in U.S. waters, it doesn't, that's still, then you go through U.S. Customs and Border Patrol and everything, and that becomes the issue. So I don't believe it's Sanibel, but we'll see.
Yeah. No,
it's got to have an airport, right?
It's got to have an airport. So, there's crazy rumors. And so, most times you would laugh this off, but there's some rumors out there. It's Jeffrey Epstein's island that he had, right? So
yeah.
there's, and a lot of that stuff. So as a reporter, and I'm one person, I'm covering 2 sports, and you've got all these crazy things going on. Scott mentioned about the NBA starting in Florida. There's a rumor going around, and more than a rumor, that Las Vegas is trying to have not only the NBA but the NHL, Major League Soccer, and fights, and that they want to put everything together, and have everybody in Las Vegas all at one time and do it. And there's places here that you could do that. So I'm sitting here and I'm going, there's a huge wide world, and there's all these things going on, and I got to figure all these things out, which is what makes the job fun. But it sometimes makes you bat your head against the wall, because you just don't know what's going on at any given time.
Oh no, Kevin, I've told my students, because we look back at fights. We look at Muhammad Ali, we look at Jack Johnson, sure. And I've been telling them I cannot wait till we can go back and reflect, because right now it's just constant change and uncertainty. Right. But I also am like, what are we going to learn from this? Because there's, and so I can't, I'm enjoying the ride, but also I'm like, oh, I'll be glad to get to normalcy. Does anyone else thank you, Kevin, on giving this kind of update. Does anyone else have a question about UFC 249? Anything else upcoming? So, Kevin, I guess, Khabib, Ramadan's coming up. Do you think that we'll wait and see him fight in the fall?
Yeah, he's not going to fight until at least September. I actually talked to him in Russia the other day. He's in a mountain somewhere, and we had a terrible connection. I was supposed to do an interview with him that was going to be on Yahoo Sports this week, and I barely could understand him. I mean, it was terrible. So we're going to try to do it again. But he went, I couldn't even tell where he was at, but he said somewhere in the mountains he's training. Ramadan begins on the 23rd. So he won't be able to fight. That's why he fought actually on this Brooklyn show, because Ramadan was coming up. So that was when 249 was supposed to be in Brooklyn. That was the reason that they scheduled it then. So we won't see Khabib again until at least September.
Yeah. What do you think about bringing Gaethje in against Ferguson? Should we have waited for the Khabib Ferguson, or? I mean, I think it's a great fight. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a terrific fight. I don't like interim title fights, and so yet again another interim title fight. Yeah. And some of you guys may remember, it was about a year ago. I did an interview with Dana in his office, and UFC 236 was coming up, And I said, I love everything about UFC 236 except the main and co-main event or interim title fights. And then we got into this argument, fight. And he's like, saying, oh, you can't have a non-title fight as the main event. And Dana's very competitive. So, he's very aggressive. So he talked me, over top of me. So I couldn't really say my thing. So the next day he calls me and he said, everybody in the office is talking about how I kicked your ass on that thing yesterday. And I said, well, you know what, Dana? I said, you weren't letting me talk. And I said, but still, I said, people don't care about my opinion. They care about yours, and they got to hear your opinion. So I won anyways. And then later I brought it up to him. So that would have been April of last year that we did that.
Yeah.
And when he announces that he's going to do the BMF title fight at Madison Square Garden, and all of a sudden the main event is a non-title fight. And I said, well, Dana, wait a minute. When we did that big thing and you were fighting with me and telling me that you won, you said you had to have a title fight as the main event. And here you're going now at Madison Square Garden with that one. So then, then he didn't want to talk about it so much.
I love it. Well, this is great. You know what? I think I would like to do, and then my students have some more questions. Can
Sure.
we learn about how you got into this business?
Sure.
Take us back. Did you always want to be a sports journalist, or and with that, a fight writer? And just let us know what your journey was.
Yeah, no, I wanted to be a journalist all my life. Everything. When I was one of the nerdy kids, I would go to bed and I would lay there and I would announce baseball and football games. And a lot of times when I announced the game, I happened to be the star of whatever game was playing. If we were in football season, I would make the heroic play to win the game, cross the goal line at the last second, or hit the home run to win the World Series or whatever it was. But I would watch, and everybody else thought I was nuts, but I would watch a game on TV and then I would go to my typewriter and write a story about the game. I was just like as goofy as you can imagine. And so I always wanted to be, and I grew up, so I'm 60 years old. I graduated high school in 1977. So when I started high school in 1973, Watergate that's when it was really starting. And unlike now where fake news is the catchword, everybody had great respect for the media and it was really important and really respected. And so I just was captivated by Watergate, and I was captivated. I love sports all my life. So I wanted to be a sports writer of some sort, not necessarily fighting. I've always loved fighting. Ali was my favorite. My dad actually boxed in the Army, and so he was a boxing fan, and he took me when I was 6 years old to see Sugar Ray Robinson fight, who a lot of people think is the greatest fighter of all time. And it turned out it was his last fight. So
Wow.
I've had a history of being at fights. So I just kind of fell into it. But I wanted to be a journalist from as long as I can remember. And so I worked toward that. I started my college career at University of Miami in Florida, and that was the stupidest thing I ever did. And the reason I said that, I got accepted at all these great journalism schools. I had applied to Northwestern, to Columbia, to Syracuse, and I got a brochure one day, and this shows how little I knew. Nobody in my family had ever gone to college. I was the first one, even my extended family. And I got this brochure for University of Miami, and there was a guy on a beach and he was running after a girl, and they were in swimming suits. And I said, "Now this is where I want to be." And so I went to the University of Miami, and I stayed there for 3 semesters. And I actually lived in the dorm. And Greg Louganis, who was the Olympic diver, lived in my suite. So we had 2 rooms that were connected by bathroom. And Greg Louganis was I was in 3325, he was in 3323, and we shared a bathroom. And so when he actually transferred, he went to Miami and then transferred to UCLA. That was huge news. I actually broke that news because I was writing for the student newspaper at the Miami Hurricane. And he lives with me, and he tells me he's transferring. So I broke the news, and I got a big kick out of it because then I saw stories, and there was still UPI back in those days. And it said, AP and UPI reported. The Miami Hurricane reported today that Greg Louganis is, and that was me. So that was a big thing for me. But I ended up transferring to Point Park, as you mentioned before, in Pittsburgh, and that's where I got my journalism degree. And I started when I first went to Point Park, I was 19, and I got a job at the Valley News Dispatch in suburban Pittsburgh. It was a Gannett paper. And so I used to go to college. I would get home about 2 o'clock, basically change, and then I had a shift. I worked at at the Valley News Dispatch 3 to 11. And I first started part-time and then I became full-time, but I was full-time at 19 years old. And I've had a full-time job ever since.
Wow. So 3 to 11, and that was the sports beat.
Yes, I was taking high school calls, and I would do the sports that nobody else wanted to do, and that's how I ended up getting to do the heavyweight title fight, because nobody was really all that interested in covering the title fight.
Really?
Yeah, nobody was interested.
So tell me, so that was your first, not only boxing ringside, that was your first major event?
That was I had covered Steelers, I had covered Pitt football, I covered, in fact, one of the quote beats I had was indoor soccer. And anybody who I covered the major indoor soccer league, the Pittsburgh Spirit. And anybody who knows me knows I really don't like soccer. There's only two sports I don't like: soccer and auto racing. And so I ended up getting assigned a beat of indoor soccer. So I was not really thrilled about that. And I covered a couple fights here and there, smaller fights that had people from our coverage area that were fighting. So I would cover those, but they were, no fighters you never heard of and cards that were never really significant. And then for some reason, Pittsburgh got the heavyweight title fight. And my boss at the time came to me and said, "Hey, look, nobody really wants to cover this. Do you want to cover it?" I said, "Are you kidding me? Of course." And so I was into it. And I think that covering that fight is sort of what got me, in the mode that I'm in now.
And to inform people, if you're not aware of this fight, it was Larry Holmes, the champion. And I mean, he defended it 20 times, I believe.
Right.
And Ronaldo Snipes. And was it Holmes? Lives around Pittsburgh? Was it
He lives in Easton, PA, so it was a couple hours away.
Kind of a hometown thing. But Ronaldo Snipes, people thought didn't have a chance, right? Or it was a very much, you would know more than me probably, because I remember people were surprised at what Snipes brought, and really pushed Holmes. And it was a great fight. I think Howard Cosell called that fight.
Yes, he did.
And
that was back in the era when the fights were on, network television. And, there was huge ratings. I did a story recently. I was researching something, and I saw, I was looking online, and I came across a paper, Indianapolis, but it was an AP story, and it talked about Ali fought Leon Spinks in the rematch at the Superdome.
Mm-hmm.
And the TV rating was 93 million people.
Wow.
And so, that was in 78. This was 81. So there was still huge interest in boxing at that time. And Larry Holmes was a really big figure. So that was a great thing for me to get to cover. And I think more than just the event itself, what was good for me was I met a lot of veteran journalists who helped me and who were willing to give me tips, and, I could ask questions to and have relationships with. And I think that was a huge thing for me.
Yeah. No, it's so interesting you brought that boxing at that time on network television, which students said that's not Netflix or something. That's like, it's on NBC. It was a huge thing because that's where everyone tuned in. We didn't have other streaming services. It was a huge deal. Because we've looked back at older fights, such as like Jack Dempsey versus Gene Tooney 2, which was broadcast on radio and had upwards of 100 million people globally listening. So it's interesting because we talk about this, about how boxing, we've studied it from, when modern boxing kind of started in the UK with, actual gloves and moving out of the bare fisting. And people always say this, that boxing is dying. And I always tell them that's always being said. Can you tell us about, because you cover both sports, what is the state of boxing these days? And also, this is a second question I'll ask, is how are they responding to COVID differently than MMA?
Well, I think, I'll answer the second question first because it's the easiest.
Yeah.
The UFC is much richer than any boxing promoter, and they have cash on hand and they can spend money. You might have seen Dana White said the other day, "This is really expensive, but I'm doing this." The boxing promoters work on very razor thin margins. And so as a result, they don't have the ability to do what Dana White's doing. They can't buy an island, and they can't, fly in the face of government regulation and say, "We're doing this and we're going to go." And so they have to do it a little bit differently as a result of that.
Yeah.
But they are working. There's a lot of them behind the scenes. They're working to try to get back and have their events on. The problem there is, unlike UFC, they depend more on the live gate. So,
Yeah.
I did a story, maybe 2 weeks ago, 10 days ago, and it was Kubrat Pulev was supposed to fight Anthony Joshua on the 20th of June, and so of course it got postponed. And Pulev was saying, "Hey, let's do this and fight in a studio, and people need to see it." And I thought, no chance that's going to happen. And why was that? Because there would be 75,000 people at that fight if they had it. And that gate is going to produce a lot of money for the promoter. And you can't replace that money. So there's no way that they can do that fight in a studio. Now, you can do some smaller ones. The TV networks or have to step up and pay that. And you may have seen I think it was the New York Times, may have been the Wall Street Journal, but Disney is losing $30 million a day during this.
Mhm.
So they're losing roughly $1 billion a month during the pandemic. So are they going to turn around and say, yeah, we'll pay you more even than what we're already paying you to put a fight on? They might do one, but they're not going to do that on a regular basis. It's going to be difficult. The fact that they can get fights on quicker than they can start up a baseball season or a football season might help, and they get some fights on early. But I think it's going to be a difficult thing. So that is the answer to the second question.
Now the first.
Remind me again what the first was.
Oh.
I talk so much.
Oh, not at all. No, it's a very hard question. The state of boxing.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Not that hard of a question.
No.
So, I think the decline of boxing follows my lifeline. I was born in '59. I think boxing started to decline in 1960 and really became, up until 1960, boxing was considered one of the two major sports along with baseball. And maybe if you wanted to say the third major sport was horse racing. Even myself, when in 1970s, the NBA was not that big. The NBA the playoffs were on tape delay at 11:30 at night. So if you were interested in watching the games, you would have to stay up until after the news was over, and then they would have the games on tape delay. Now, it wasn't that bad because the internet wasn't there, so you didn't know actually who won or who lost. But still, you had to stay up till what would it be 2 in the morning to see the games. So the NBA wasn't big. The NFL, you may have heard of the greatest game ever played. That was 1958. That was kind of when the NFL started to get big, but NFL didn't really turn big until the Super Bowl era, and that was 1967. So boxing, was really dominant. And then starting in the 60s, it began this gradual slow slide, and it really went down in terms of acceptance by the American public. And it just declined all the time. And so now, but what I see is there are a lot of fight fans who were kind of displaced, and they used to like the fights and they used to watch it religiously, but now they get disappointed at how the sport is presented and all the problems that come up in the sport. They don't see the fights they want to see. 6 years to make Mayweather Pacquiao, all these things, they just walk away from it. But if you hit them with the right event, they come back. And that's why we saw the Mayweather Pacquiao fight be so big, and some other fights on the side. So what I've always said, and what I firmly believe, is what the boxing promoters need to do is they need to say, okay, we're going to knowingly lose some money in the short term, like put on very strong, deep cards. Don't put one great fight and then a bunch of fights that nobody wants to see. That was what Fury Wilder was, right? You had terrible fights on that card. And the reason they did it was they were paying the fighters so much money. Tyson Fury made $35 million plus. Deontay Wilder made, I think his was 28 million. Don't quote me on that, but it was in that range, 28 million plus. And so, they had to be careful how much they spent on their undercard because they didn't know what the fight was going to do.
Yeah.
So, but if they come back and they say, well, we're going to start paying these top guys a little bit less and pay other guys a little more and even it out a bit, and then you can put on deeper cards. I think that it's not going to happen overnight, Nancy. It's going to take time. They're going to have to do it for a while. But if you convince the public, hey, we are changing our behavior. We see what the UFC has done. We see what MMA promoters have done. We're going to try to do that. I think people like the product. It's just the fact that they don't like how it's presented to them.
I agree. Scott, I know you had a burning question on boxing. You have a couple, so.
Yeah, so Kevin, my first live fight was 6 November 1993 in Las Vegas in the parking lot at Caesar's Palace.
The fan man.
The fan man fight, Evander Holyfield versus Riddick Bowe 2. I'll never forget it.
I was there.
Fantastic, right? I was sitting between Daryl Strawberry and Hulk Hogan. I was 15 years old. I mean, had my braces taken off just in time to get out to Las Vegas. What a memory, man. What a memory. So, you know, I'm a boxing guy at heart. I always have been. I was influenced by my uncle who took me to that fight. You know, so you brought up something interesting, so I'll keep it brief and I'll ask two quick questions, one based on what you said and one on something Nancy and I had spoken on earlier. I love Mikey Garcia. I think he could potentially go on a historical run at 140, but he's refusing, and he said he's going to go to 147 and test the waters. We saw what happened against Errol Spence, and it was a little ugly. Granted, Errol Spence, in my opinion, is probably the #1 fighter pound for pound in the world. You know, and you can fight that with Loma and a couple other guys. That's fine. What do you think his prospects are at 47? I know he's mentioned Pacquiao, but Pacquiao's got business with Bud Crawford and potentially with Thurman again down the road. Does that fight come off? And number two, you mentioned the depth of cards. Do you feel that UFC is getting a little bit ugly with the depth of their cards, given how watered down it is by putting on so many events a year? Because I have the exact same opinion. I've shared it on boxing. It's a little bit difficult, you know, to pay 60, 70, 80 bucks to watch one fight that could potentially be over in a few seconds. And sometimes in the UFC, that's what's going on now. So I'll shut up and let the pros talk.
Sure. So, you know, Mikey Garcia, I think Mikey's one of the best fighters in the world. So he is going to be successful, whatever weight class he fights at. He could fight at 35, he could fight at 40, which I believe is his best weight, or he could fight at 47. I think at 47, he's going to be extremely competitive with most guys there. Errol Spence, you know, I interviewed Errol Spence at the Thurman Pacquiao. We did a live pre-fight show. Thurman Pacquiao were going to fight. Spence came on as a guest on my show. And the first thing I said to him was like, "You're like a light heavyweight. He's so big." And so I just don't see, you know, when you look at him and Manny and him and Mikey, you know, it's just, he's too big for those guys. I think Terrence Crawford is too good for Mikey, but I think that Mikey would be in there with pretty much anybody else. There's going to be a lot of money offered for Pacquiao to fight Mikey Garcia in the Middle East. And when this all comes back, that could be one of the early fights that we see because they've been desperate over the years to get Manny Pacquiao to fight in the Middle East. And I think the circumstance now might make that a doable fight. So that is something that I think you could see Pacquiao Garcia in the Middle East. And as far, I think Mikey will be very good. I think he could beat Manny. I think that's a fight that would be a toss-up fight in my mind. I might lean toward Manny, but it's a toss-up. I think the only two that I would say at welterweight right now that I don't think Mikey could deal with, obviously Errol and Bud Crawford either.
Scott, you have any other questions? Because I have a few more boxing things that my students have brought up.
No, that's great. Just, you know, wondering your thought about the depth of the UFC cards. And I totally agree with you. I think those two guys are way too much meat for Mikey at this point. And also the future of, I'm a huge Ryan Garcia fan. I've sent some videos to Nancy. The guy just absolutely blows my mind. I really want to see big things for this guy. And he's doing it big right now. So maybe talk a little bit about Ryan Garcia, because I'm a big fanboy. I love him.
So those two, let's answer the UFC. I'll disagree with you a little bit, Scott, on the UFC. I think more than most times they give pretty good cards. You know, they don't always. They have 600 fighters on the roster, and sometimes you make a fight, and you know, you say, "Hey, we know this is going to be fireworks." Tony Ferguson against anybody, you know, it's going to be fireworks. And then there's other ones that you know you think might be good, and they don't. It doesn't pan out. But I think that one of the reasons that the UFC's had the success they've had is, you know, they put on evenly matched fights. It doesn't always have to be the absolute best talented fighters in the world, as long as you match them evenly. And I think that's what UFC does a good job of. They match fighters very evenly, and they know, and that tends to produce good events. As far as Ryan Garcia, you know, I think the number one thing I think of Ryan Garcia is he is a brilliant marketer. He has several million people on Instagram following him, and he does that all by himself. You know, he doesn't have a company doing it, and he has made himself into a star really before he became a star in the ring. People know who he is. People want to see him fight, and kudos to Ryan for doing that. I think him going to Eddie Reynoso and training under Canelo's team a brilliant move on his part, and you're seeing the improvement in him. Golden Boy tends to be very conservative the way they match their fighters, and they were matching him way undermatched, and I don't think he was growing or getting better. He was fighting people that were just, beneath him and not nearly as good as he is. He is extraordinarily quick, and I think the one thing at lightweight, he's in that group, and I interviewed Teofimo Lopez. That's on Yahoo Sports now, and you can see it. You have Teofimo Lopez, Ryan Garcia, Devin Haney, Lomachenko, and Tank Davis. All five of those guys are extraordinarily talented, and I think it sort of reminds me of back in the 80s when you had Hagler, or well, I'll eliminate Hagler, but Leonard, Hearns, Duran, Wilfred Benitez was a Hall of Famer. There was some other good ones out there that fighting at welterweight. I think this is that version of those, and I think Ryan is going to be in any conversation with those guys in terms of big fights as we go in the next year to 2 years.
Exciting. Yes, I get a lot of Ryan Garcia videos from Scott, so I'm now a fangirl. So I want to ask you also about kind of the promotion, the people who are showing the fights, and one of those is DAZN, which came aboard. I don't know. They started, I think, with soccer in Germany, and they've been building it. But what they've done, and I'm so curious how they're existing in the pandemic, is that they would buy fighters, right? I think they paid $300 million for Canelo.
365.
What was that?
365.
365. Oh, yes, all that. They also Eddie Hearn with is it Matchroom? Yes, they gave him like a huge amount to put on fights, and I think that they're getting their money from an investor. I've heard about. So, how do you think that that's going to work now that we are, they don't have fights going on? I don't know anyone. I'll be honest, I've disconnected my DAZN subscription right now. How do you think they're going to win? And then what are your thoughts on having, they're promoting these fights with YouTube stars? Now, students, you probably are very familiar with a Jake Paul, correct? Who fought, and I don't even know how to pronounce this guy's name. Anderson Gibb?
Anderson Gibb, yeah.
Yes. What are your thoughts on what they're doing there? So that's a lot.
Well, let's start with that. I mean, I wrote a column about this, and unlike a lot of boxing writers, I don't have a problem with it. I think, hey, if it brings more eyes to boxing and it gets people interested, God bless them, and I think it's a good promotional tactic. Eddie Hearn is convinced that it's going to develop boxing fans. I am not convinced of that, though. I was at the first fight when Logan Paul fought KSI.
Yes.
And when that fight happened, before the main event, you looked around, and anytime a YouTube star would walk in, the fights are going on in the ring, and everybody's looking the other way. So they weren't boxing fans; they were fans of these YouTube stars. Yeah. And so I don't have a problem with it. Hey, it's a creative way to try to promote and build the sport. And I have been critical of promoters for not building their product and building the sport. So I'm not going to criticize them now when they're doing something that actually is getting people in the building. I just don't know that they're going to be successful long-term converting some of those people into fans. If they do, I think it's brilliant and great. I just question, the cost-benefit ratio, because believe me, they're paying those YouTube people a lot of money to do that. Yeah. And more than they would be paying any other fighter at that level. And are they getting the benefit out of it? I'm not so sure they are. As far as DAZN's business model, I mean, I've questioned it a lot. I think they made it a lot better when they went that $99 a year route. And so they have two options now. You can pay the $99 a year and you get all the fights that they put on. If you're a fight fan, you cannot really argue about that, because anybody else is charging a pay-per-view $65, $75, $85. You're getting an entire year, and they put on good fights for $100. But if you only want to cherry pick it, you can go in for $20 for a particular month, and you get every fights that they have. So let's say you want to see Canelo fight when he comes back. He's going to fight Triple G. You sign up, and Canelo and Triple G, let's say they fight September 5th, and you sign up on September 5th, you'll have, for 30 days after that, you'll have DAZN. So whatever other shows they have on. Now they're hoping that they can catch you and keep you and turn you into a long-term subscriber. I think the problem they have is they don't, in the U.S., they don't have enough sports, and certainly NFL is king here, and rights fees are going to be a problem. They overpaid for a lot of the fighters, and especially they gave Gennady Golovkin a ton of money. He's fought really nobody since he's been on DAZN. Got very poor subscription ratings. He's not driving subscriptions for them. That's not helping them. So I think you'll see them do business a little bit differently in terms of how much they pay the fighters. As far as I do believe, they've said around the world where they have NFL rights in other countries, they've held those payments back, and they've held payments for other sports leagues back because there's no sports going on. I think you'll see when NFL contracts come up in the U.S. that DAZN is going to bid aggressively to get the rights and to try to get, and they won't get a full rights, but I do believe that from some sports they'll get on there. They have a relationship with Major League Baseball now, and they show highlights. I think it's Major League Baseball putting their toe in the water and saying, "Is this something we want?" I think you'll see that that relationship move forward as rights come up. But I don't know all the dates that all the various contracts expire, but I think when they do, and those will be publicized, you'll see DAZN bidding.
Interesting. Oh, I didn't even think about that. The bidding is going to happen now that the other entities, you're talking your ESPN, Disney's, may not be ready to outbid someone. So,
well, Nancy, when you look at it, think about this. Disney has, and it's a big, they created Disney Plus, but they also created ESPN Plus, and ESPN Plus actually predated Disney Plus, and they are really committed to growing that because they feel the long-term future of sports is going to be streaming.
Yeah.
And right now, ESPN Plus is a better bet for if you're a fight fan than Disney Plus because they have the UFC on there, or then the DAZN because they have Disney on there. They have UFC on there. They have Top Rank Boxing on there. Plus, they have all other sports. They get NHL games. They get Major League Baseball games. They have golf. They have all the 30 for 30 library. So they have things that you can't get on DAZN. So if you are and it's you're cost conscious, it's $4.99 a month, as opposed to even if you get the yearly, it's $9 something for DAZN. So that's a big issue, and I think that to me that's a thing where right now Disney's winning, but I think that all is going to be streaming.
Yeah, no, and I agree. It was interesting that you talking about your fights that used to be on network television, and now it's likely you're saying most likely all sports will be streaming.
I think eventually it's going to be all sports. I mean, TV. Hey, look, and the TV people won't come out and say it now, but TV is a dying industry, and people are, all your students will, where do they consume most of their content? On mobile devices, and they're not sitting down in front of a TV for 3 or 4 hours. They're going and doing things, and that's increasingly changing. And as the internet connections get better, and as technology gets better, and we can deliver it better, it's going to be more and more the way it is. And so I think they understand that TV is kind of people of my generation are used to sitting down and spending several hours in front of the television, but people of the current generation are not, and it's going to give the freedom to go out and do what you want to do. And so you can go and be out with your friends and pull your iPad out or pull your phone out and watch the fight and see what's going on. And I think that is or watch the football game or whatever. That is going to be what's going to happen.
Yeah, and I bet when we were younger, you would never think it'd be possible to not watch a fight, on a closed circuit theater or on a big screen TV. And it is interesting how it is acceptable to have those sports on your phone. And, so who even knows if there's another mechanism we'll be talking about, Kevin, in 15 years. But we're getting close to the end of class. Does anyone, I have one more question for you, but does anyone else have anything you want to ask Kevin Iole? Because I know we've covered a lot. Raise your hand. I can see hands. No? Well, Kevin, what we've been doing, and thank you so much for coming.
Of course, I loved it.
Such a pleasure. We've been asking because we may have some content coming up May 9th, or likely, who knows. We've been finding the pleasure of watching old fights because there's a sense that because it takes place in present on the screen, I enjoy it even better sometimes because you can see the strategy. And So I'm telling my students, you can find a lot of these on YouTube or, ESPN Plus, all of these that we just discussed. What would be your recommendation for a great fight to rewatch or to watch for a lot of these?
Okay, now I just said everybody's going to be looking on their phones and everything, but Saturday on ESPN is going to actually have 12 hours of fights. I did a story on it yesterday. Classic fights, including for the first time ever, all three Ali Frazier fights.
What?
And so they're going to end with the three Ali Frazier fights. So I would recommend the Ali Frazier one, probably the most iconic fight of all time. Ali Frazier 3, one of the craziest, nuttiest back and forth fights. So those I would recommend. And Showtime had one on last week that you can find online, Corrales and Castillo. And read the story that I did last Friday on that, because I talked to Diego Corrales' widow, and she in the story, she basically told me after the first fight, they signed for the rematch, and he knew it was too soon, and he thought he was going to die. And he prepared her for dying. He said, hey, I'm going to fight in this fight and I'm probably going to die. And he wanted to get her pregnant and have children right away because he didn't have any kids. And he wanted to have kids with her before he died. And her quotes were really chilling. And I think, you look at that and it could lead to some interesting discussions in your class. But Michelle Corrales, she's now remarried. But I interviewed her last week, and that's in my story on that fight. But that Corrales-Castillo fight is the best fight I ever covered live.
Mm-hmm.
It was incredible. So that's one. So I would say check out ESPN. They have 11 fights: Mike Tyson, Muhammad Ali, Oscar. A lot of great fights on Saturday, ending with the three Ali Frazier fights. And then if you can find Corrales Castillo, just a sensational, more modern fight.
Wow. How did I miss this? And I have my Saturday. So thank you, Kevin. Again, this has been such a pleasure.